Alright, so the second part of this lesson is a lick that is actually one of the ideas he played at the very beginning of the video that he plays on. Again, you think of it in, or I think of it in C minor, and I base it around C minor pentatonic. So it starts out basically sliding from around the 3rd fret. It's just kind of a quick slide, so it can be from anywhere. And it's so just take the 3rd fret on the D string to the 5th fret of the D string. Then he does a 6th interval to the 4th fret of the B string. And he pivots back down to that 5th fret of the D string. So it's... And what he does there, he slides up from the 6th fret to the 8th fret on the B string, plays the 6th fret on the E string, back down to the 8th fret on the B string. So, and again, he's really kind of plucking those and muting at the same time. Then he gets into the legato portion of this run, and if you think of it in the pentatonic scale, he starts on the flat 5 note. And if you're thinking of C minor pentatonic, the way I'm seeing this is that familiar shape that everybody knows on the 8th fret of C minor pentatonic. So if you go behind that to what would be essentially the 5th position of the pentatonic scale, and there's that flat 5 in there, that's where he's playing this lick. So it starts out with the 7th fret on the B string, then he goes 8th fret, 7, and 6 on the B string. And that's all picking the first note and hammering on and pulling off the rest. Then he goes to the G string and pulls off from the 8th fret to the 5th fret. Now, one thing that is cool is to take these ideas and play them all around the neck. So if you take this lick, but you put it into that first position that you might be more familiar with, those are the same notes. Now if I just pick those individually instead of hammering on and pulling off, you'll hear and this. And now you go to the other position up here, which would be the 2nd position. They all sound the same because they are essentially the same notes. The only difference is when you play the first one, you're actually, the first 4 notes are hammer-ons and pull-offs on the same string. Then you pull off 2 notes on the next string. Well, if you play it in that first position, you get 1 note on one string, 1 note on the next string, then 3 pull-offs, and then 1 note. So the pattern's different, and you hear the difference. Because you hear picked notes as opposed to legato notes. Now if you go to this position, the 2nd position, and play that, that sounds like the same as the first position because it is essentially the same 1, 2, 3, 4, which are all hammer-ons and pull-offs. Then a pull-off of the next 2 strings, or the next 2 notes on the next string. So, but the difference between those two, the notes are on lower strings. So one thing to think about when you're playing solos, if you're playing with a keyboard player that's playing, you know, a lot of chord bass notes and chords and stuff, and then you have a bass player chugging away and doing some licks, you're muddying, you know, you have that bass range covered in the tonalities. So you may not want to play that lick way down here. You may want to play it up here because it's playing it on higher strings and it doesn't sound as bassy, so it could actually drive through and cut through what the other guys are playing in the band. It's just something to think about. It's not necessarily something you always have to think about, but it definitely does make a difference where you play the lick. Anyway, sidetrack, let's get back to the lick. So it starts out, then he hammers on from the 5th fret of the G string to the 7th and 8th fret of the G string. And then he goes into the arpeggio thing, which he does a lot. He does a scale run to an arpeggio to a scale run to an arpeggio. So he goes 5, 7, 8 on the G string. Then he does an arpeggio from the 6th fret of the B string to the 7th fret of the G string to the 8th fret of the D string. And And you can think of that as a B flat major. So then he pulls off from that 8th fret to the 5th fret on the D string. Then he goes up again like he did before from the 5th to the 7th to the 8th on that D string. Then he plays another arpeggio and pulls off. So it's and this time it's an F major arpeggio. From the 5th fret on the G string, 7th fret D string, and 8th fret of the A string, and he pulls off to the 5th fret of the A string. So the whole thing together is. And then at this point, he slides up a half step, and he runs up a scale. So from that 5th fret to the 6th fret to the 8th fret to the 10th fret, all on the A string. And then he goes up an arpeggio. This time it's a G minor arpeggio from the 10th fret of the A string to the 8th fret of the D string to the 7th fret of the G string. So that's. And again, if you look at that as pentatonic scale, if it's a C minor pentatonic, those first 4 notes are all in the pentatonic scale. And then he breaks out and he plays that note, which is the 9th. And here he goes from that note, once he goes up that G minor arpeggio, he hammers on to the 10th fret on the G string, pulls back off to the 7th fret of the G string. Then he does a chromatic run by sliding up to the 8th fret, hammering on the 9th fret and the 10th fret, all of the G string. So that's. Then he does a similar thing on the next string. He goes from the 8th fret on the B string, hammers on 11, pulls off back to 8, and then hammers on 9, 10. So that whole thing goes. And now he goes down. So he was introducing scale notes, arpeggio, scale notes, scale note, then chromatic notes, then scale notes again with arpeggio, with chromatic, I'm sorry. Now he throws in another arpeggio. And this is the 10th fret, the 8th fret of the E string to the 10th fret of both the B string and the G string. And then he pulls off to the 8th fret of the G string. So, and that whole thing goes. And from there he slides up to the 10th fret on the G string, hammers on the 12th fret of the G string, and goes up another arpeggio.